Let's stop being lazy. Let's do this. Hello, everyone. Okay. Welcome. We're here, episode 11 of Branching Factor. We've made it into the double digits. We're still surviving. We've made it a completely different setup. This might work. This might not. We're going to find out. Tonight, it's a Friday night here on Branching Factor. It might be Friday night. When you're listening, it probably won't be. But anyway, we're all here having a good time. I'm your host, Tommy Thompson. Let's quickly spin it around, which is not going to make sense if you're listening to us. But hey, first up, Quang. Quang is here. How you doing, buddy?
Hello, I'm doing not too bad. Just surviving, getting through it the best I can.
Friday night. We just got to survive it. George, how are you surviving your Friday?
Look, it may not be Friday night for our listeners, but it's always Friday night in my soul, Tommy.
It's always Friday night, wherever George is. I think that's that's the thing to take away from
it's
this.
Friday night somewhere.
And of course, we actually have our special guest who it isn't Friday night where he is. Say a big hello to Matt Gambell.
Hello. It is Friday, just turned afternoon, I guess.
I'm glad that you just pointed that out and it wasn't like it's Tuesday. It's like, where is he? How is he getting in touch with us? What's going on? This is absolutely insane. So yeah, quick primer for anyone who doesn't know who Matt is, because at this point you should pretty much know who I am and who Quang is and who George is, because that means you've been listening to us ever since episode 1. And if you haven't, please go back, because we'd really appreciate you doing that. Matt is a game programmer who is currently based out in Vancouver. I don't know why there's an extra R in there, but Vancouver, out in Canada, currently working at Sunderlust Games, and is also known, courtesy, as you can see from the placard in the background, as the founder of the YouTube series Game Dev Guide, and is one of our indie game developers from the UK who managed to escape. The rest of us are still here, but you got out. What was the secret?
I legitimately escaped. That is like actually true. It's like the thing happened that shall not be named, and I tried to escape, and Canada were like, "Yep, you can come here for 2 years." And then COVID happened, and I was like, I don't want to go home. So my buddy Nels Anderson, who runs Sunderlust Studios, hired me. I was like, hey. We spoke when I first came here, and he was like, "Do you want to come work for me?" I was like, "Maybe." And then I was like, "Hey, if I come work for you, can you help me stay?" And so that is what happened, and I've been here since 2019, and now I'm a permanent resident of Canada, so I can legally stay here.
You're not coming back.
I don't have to come back if I don't want to. That's the.
Well, over here on Hell Island, it's been very windy and wet this week. Actually, guys, how have you been faring with this? Because fortunately, I bought a house on a hill.
Yeah.
Is it haunted?
Not yet.
Which would have been apt because it's also Halloween this week, obviously.
Right.
That's
haunted by my failures.
Well, as we all are, Tommy. But no, in terms of this week, I mostly made sure that my bosuns were prepared. So we really battened down those hatches. And yes, we should be arriving in port shortly. That's no, I'm not actually on a boat. I just live in a one-bed flat in North London, and it's not that interesting. So I also know someone who was playing Return of the Obra Dinn recently, and so therefore they've just been bringing up everything in regards to that game. So I really wanted to get the word bosun in on this record. So
nailed it.
Yeah, nailed it. It was seamless.
So for me, my old house, which I sold, used to have a leak in the roof. And so every time it rained, I had to get the buckets out and empty them, and it was a whole ordeal. It was such an ordeal that I think it scarred me a little bit, because now I'm in this lovely 2-bed flat in Peckham, and it's fine. There's no leaks anywhere. But every time it rains, I have nightmares about emptying these buckets of water, and it still gets me to this day.
I actually got a flood warning on my phone last week, which I was really confused by, because when we moved into this place, I quickly checked to make sure, like, 1, there's no rivers nearby. 2, we live on a hill. So it's going to be really difficult for us to be flooded. I'm still on the register for when I used to live in Derby in the Midlands. And I remember when I moved there, they said, oh, that river up the road, there is a flood risk with it. And I was like, oh, well, it's fine. I lived on the first floor of this apartment building. I didn't think it was a big deal or whatever. Yeah, I got the call like last weekend, like, get out the house. your area's about to be flooded. And then I saw it on TikTok and everything else that like downtown Derby was pretty much underwater.
Yeah, you sort of lean out of your window in North Hertfordshire, going, "Hang on a second, this doesn't look as this isn't looking like your phone call is telling me it's going to look. It looks very unfloody at the moment." And then the internet was different.
Yeah, there was a half second. I looked at my phone and I'm like, "Huh? What?" Like, yeah, the weather's bad, but it's not like that bad.
Yeah.
And then, you know, it was all right. And then I saw the address and, oh, right, that was like 3 houses ago. Okay, fair enough. Yeah. I'm good. Meanwhile, messaging my partner and I'm like, how are you doing? They went up to visit family in northern Scotland and they're like, oh, it's raining sideways. I'm like, cool. Good luck with the flight home. Oh, dear. But anyway, yes, if you're not familiar, Branching Factor isn't a podcast about weather. It's a podcast about demystifying all things related to games, whether you're into game development, whether you work in the games industry, whether it's coming to games research. We're just trying to help demystify all this very much in the same way that everything else that, you know, I've done over the years on AI and games on YouTube, like Quang does with an awful lot of his touring, showing his games off, but also doing talks. And George just generally being the conduit between the games industry and the rest of British society, I think, at this point.
Yeah, that's pretty much what I'm doing at the moment, Tommy. And at the moment, video games are up. Pleased to say they're up. They might be down at any point, so you know, ride those stocks while they're still high.
Well, speaking of stocks riding high, I mean, one of the reasons we actually reached out to Matt to come and have a chat with us, because we were chatting right in the middle of the Unity debacle that sort of kicked off. I mean, it's cooled down now, right? But that was like a fun couple of months. I was going to say, to bring everyone up to speed, if you're not familiar with what happened. So the Unity game engine, which I think, I was going to say, George might be the exception, is the only one who hasn't programmed anything in it.
No, I played games
get you
that
there.
use Unity.
I dabbled with it. I dabbled with it for a short amount of time, but realized back in Unity 3, I think it was, I realized it was terrible for 2D games, so I pushed it aside.
It has improved a little bit in that regard. But so
a little bit.
Unity changed, was back in August, I believe it was, went about starting trying to change their licensing structure on a per install basis, which has done an absolutely, well, as you can imagine, that was received incredibly well because they wanted to turn it into a revenue thing where every time someone installed your game, you gave them money, more or less.
There were a couple of issues with what they announced. I think I have strong feelings that I've spoken about on my channel and publicly, so I'm not going to double down too much on this. But they announced that any game that had ever been made with Unity in time memoriam now had to pay a fee anytime anybody installed, whatever that meant, the game. And above a certain threshold, but like let's say you made a game like 5 years ago and it's still making good money, but Unity had just decided that now you owe them money every time somebody installed, not played, just like installed, whatever that meant, your game. So that there were so many things about the way in which the announcement, it wasn't necessarily the announcement itself, it was a lot of the wording of the announcement and the way in which they chose to do this thing that caused so much of a backlash, because a lot of it was very vague and ultimately relied on Unity being the source of truth. And that doesn't bode well with a lot of people if you're trying to run a business. So they got a lot of pushback for the way in which they announced it. I don't think anybody specifically was arguing about the fact that Unity were changing this. Like that had its own problem, right? And that creates its own questions. Yeah. But it was like, it's not what you said, it's the way you said it sort of thing that was the problem there and caused so many problems. And the underhanded nature of what they were doing. And now that kind of caused the backlash.
Yeah, I mean, there was so much of it as well that, you know, they're trying to double dip because this is already an engine that you have to pay for a monthly license for. They've abolished the mid-tier license as well now, if I remember correctly.
So, you know, as part of the announcement, they removed some of the limitations and they'd moved some things around, which, like, there were some good things about what they were trying to do, and we ultimately you could see what they were going for, but it was kind of like they were going for a rev share with like a bunch of extra steps, and just it just was making the whole thing so much more complicated.
Yeah.
Like it was just more complicated than it needed to be, and I still feel that way about where they've landed. But ultimately, where they've landed now is much better, and that's come from a lot of conversations that me and a few other creators have had, as well as other developers, etc. But like this whole initial announcement shook the independent industry, and Unity really sort of had to do something because it was a shit show.
I think as you're saying, it was the wording of it. There was not much clarity in what they were saying. It felt like everybody was have to pay out of nowhere, and it did cause a lot of panic through the industry because no one really understood what they were saying. It just felt like if people install our game, that means we have to pay, and then it was I think the next day then they try to clarify it on Twitter. So that's not the best place to do it.
Right, absolutely. Because if you're going to make what is a pretty substantial change to your business model, now, if companies tend to do that, the general process, especially when you've hit any form of scale, is pretty much as follows. First of all, you work out exactly what you're saying, and you work out exactly what you're going for from a policy perspective. Then you go and consult. You go and talk to your audience. You go and talk to whether it's consumer based, whether it's user based. You have that process where you have that conversation, because you might change your policy, you might change your communications before you go out and announce it. And then what you do is you give a period of time, and a decent period of time, for a change to be implemented, because people need to be able to adapt to it. Now, the problem for the whole Unity announcement, I think, was I think a few things, exactly as alluded to. First of all, it wasn't clear how it worked. There were really simple questions like, what happens if you take part in a Humble Bundle and you hand over thousands of keys and they get used? Do you get charged for those? Is there a charity tax now? And it was clear they didn't have an answer to that. Then in terms of the lack of consultation, they clearly hadn't spoken to anyone outside of, my guess is essentially, and actually my guess, it's borne out a little bit by some reporting from the editor of Mobile Gamer.biz. It was essentially the C-suite having a chat with a PowerPoint deck. And it very much feels to me as if someone put up a slide that said, we estimate there are this many installs on Unity. Therefore, if we got even just as tiny, even if we got 20 cents an install, look at how much money we would get, which would help us out of the situation that a lot of tech businesses and a lot of games businesses are in now, where money is no longer free to lend. And if your company has been running at a loss and running at a negative valuation, you're suddenly in trouble because you can't just go in and get an investor to go and prop you up as easily as you used to be. And then just in terms of the rollout, it was a complete disaster. They hadn't briefed their team properly about it. They didn't brief the industry properly about it. They had people, exactly as Quang was saying, going onto Twitter and both supporting the company line, but then also trying to undermine people who were complaining about the fact that this had been handled really badly, in a way that I would say, don't ever do that. And I mean, to get to the point where essentially they had executives, especially from leading mobile games businesses, directly telling staff to F off to their faces. You had 15% of Unity's advertisers stepping away in the immediate aftermath of it. And then, the ultimate outcome of it is that its president went from being in a seemingly unassailable position to magically deciding that it was time for him to resign and retire. So they went from, here is a policy that's going to make us a bit of money, to, we've lost our president, we've had to change the policy, and everyone's very sad and annoyed with us, which I would call as a bad couple of weeks in the office.
And I think their stock is still down about $20 from when that announcement was made. Their stock is currently, I think, $1 higher than it was at the start of the year. Yeah, and this is also kind of indicative of Unity's ongoing problem, is it's a company that's never really turned a profit. And it's never been sustainable. And so they keep trying to find things to try and prop themselves up. And so I was getting ready, actually, I've been writing a separate thing about this because, funnily enough, earlier this year, it was AI. They were doubling down on generative AI was going to be a big thing. And then that has kind of came and went, unsurprisingly, because the games industry is not in a position right now where generative AI technologies are considered largely compatible with ongoing development processes. I've talked about this elsewhere. But yeah, like this, and then it's all right. Now we'll just try and fleece our existing customers. And what the thing that freaked me out was when they talked about, we're going to count installs. Like, how are you counting that? Where's that data coming from? Are you tracking every single device that people install their games on and you're having it? We know already the Unity splash screen's doing something and sending data back periodically, but are you now having that mandated for every game? And then also they were like, oh, we're going to track installs. So for like getting revenue from, if your game's on Game Pass, we'll reach out to get Microsoft. Like, I don't see that working because one, I don't see Microsoft going, sure, let's us go and count and give you this proprietary information. But also like, you know, if that turns into a tax that then becomes a thing on Game Pass, that's going to have an impact down the line on actual developers getting Game Pass deals. It's like none of it. They hadn't thought of any of it in the long term, really. So
the two things I want to raise about that is they brought in the thresholds, which seemed fine for most people, but if you're a small developer, I think you will hit the hardest with it being 20 cents an install. But if you were over like a million installs or whatever it was a fraction of a cent, and that just hurt every single indie developer that was out there, which is unreal. And then if we're talking about shares and stuff, didn't John Riccitiello, he sold a bunch of shares before it all came out?
It's kind of a red herring. That's unrelated to the situation. That was a misnomer that went around. Essentially, the C-suite just have scheduled. Like it was more a case of bad timing than anything else. But yeah. Like from my understanding of the situation, his share selling thing is just like something that had been scheduled and just happened to be the same week that they announced this change, and it just kind of got lumped into that. Which I mean, not fair, but yeah,
yeah. Which again, exactly. It's one of those things where a poorly planned communication, because if the comms team had been listened to and or been given any opportunity to speak about this, they would have gone, going to announce quite a controversial policy just after you've had one of these scheduled sell-offs. It's probably not going to look very good. And they went, YOLO, let's go ahead. But no, I think the two things, especially that I found sort of not necessarily amusing, but I thought was particularly pertinent around this. So first of all, I mean, mentioning indie developers getting hit, the other market segment that really got hit as well was mobile game developers, right? Because free to play, right? Okay. Yeah, massive volumes. And they felt particularly that it was like a stand and deliver moment, because it was, here comes this fee. But if you use our ads in your service, the fee's going to go down. And it's very much like, I mean, that does feel very much like someone's just sort of swung open the doors of my little wagon and pointed a pistol at me and said, stand and deliver. But then I think as well, the Game Pass point, I think it's just funny, you know, again, in terms of how poorly thought through it was. I mean, if you look at businesses like Microsoft and you look at the way they plan their budgets and you see the amount of work and effort, because, you know, they have to be declaring their results in certain legal ways quarter to quarter. They have to plan around half years, if not years, if not multiple years. The idea that Unity could just pop up, you know, go, oh, by the way, we don't really know how we're going to handle this, but Microsoft, do you want to give us a load of cash in 3 months' time? Microsoft would go, no, that's just not how this works.
Very politely, no.
Yeah, and because there was one other thing about this as well, which I think we've kind of alluded to. It's around a bit of the market dominance in regards to Unity as an engine. You know, it's approximately 30% of market share, and so the thing that managed to make it even worse for them was that people started bringing this up. And, you know, as a direct response in terms of this, I know that some of the European, I think it was the European Game Developer Federation, I think in the UK, Tiger, wrote to the competition regulators to say, well, hang on a minute, has this party got too much dominant power within the market? And, you know, frankly, competition regulators are busy people, and they have lots and lots of different things to look at, but they're also looking for easy wins. And they're looking for places where they could probably look at something and go, it would be quite popular if we did something here. And so to just put yourself on that radar at a time when you're already not making money, it's not bright, people. It's not bright.
Yeah, so my understanding, so I'm just like, I'm part of the Unity Insiders program with a bunch of other creators. And so we've had, I can only say if you like, I'm under NDA, right? Because there's obviously, of course, that's just part of being in that program. Totally. But like, the things we've spoken about seem that like there's some stuff we got ahead of time that we were allowed to give feedback to, and we throughout that process we were giving feedback to them, and they listened a lot more after the debacle and made some changes to the policy based on a lot of sessions that we had with them. But a lot of my understanding from what I heard talking to some of the team there at Unity is that a lot of this decision came down to try and capture, like, which I kind of get, right? Because like there are a lot of people that aren't paying for subscription for Unity and making money off of it, and this is what this kind of change is trying to capture. Essentially, not the games audience. So there are also a lot of companies that are making a lot of money but are only paying for a small amount of subscriptions, right? So this was their like attempt to capture that. It's basically, they were trying to capture a small portion that are making a large amount of money, and it trickles down to have a negative effect on everybody else, right? And so that's kind of how the version they're at now captures some of that stuff. But that's still the problem that they have as a company, is that there are, even business to business, right? Like one of the examples that I was thinking about when I heard about this was like, there are companies that make like a simulation project or something, right? To, I don't know, operate a crane or something. And now everybody they go to, they're using that software that they've built and making decent amount of money doing these training sims or whatever, but they've stopped kind of developing the game, so they're not paying for a Unity license anymore or something along those lines, right? And so it's like
I worked on one of those. I actually worked on a training simulation that was actually used by a Air Force for a particular nation, which I don't think I'm allowed to actually declare which one. Actually, I think I am, because they never actually got me to sign an NDA. But anyway, but it was for weather equipment, and so it was a VR training simulator for putting together weather equipment.
Yeah,
we did that in Unity. I'm pretty sure we had one paid license and a dev team of about 6 of us, and it was just that guy that made the build.
Yep, had the license,
and that was it. Yeah,
and these companies, and so I can understand what they're like. Why this? Yeah. It's the same there. It's not what they said. It's how they said it, right? It's like you can understand why they. But it has so many trickle down like problems with what they're doing that it's just like so
the fact that Unreal Engine, which is their competitor, let's face it, has already got this revenue share model in there. It's been in there for years. They don't charge for the price of the engine. They charge you for revenue. And they're tackling those big fish. It's like, okay, you're making a lot of money. We're going to get that money out of you one way or another. So, revenue share is the way to do it. And like, as much as I'm loath to defend or advocate for Epic Games of all people, because they're also trash in many regards, like their revenue share model is painfully simple.
Yes, that was a big thing we point up, is the simplicity of the revenue share model. The interest, and I brought this up in my video, my sort of aftermath video that I said was that like the challenge for Unity is that they can't compete with Unreal, right? Because if Unity come out and say we're also doing a 5% rev share over $1 million, not that like Unity does a lot of things really well, and there are I'm a big Unity advocate, so obviously this should be taken from a experience standpoint. It's like there's a reason I use Unity every day and I love it, right? But once the business model changes, as a professional studio making a video game and trying to make a profit and thinking about the pain points you have using that software, you start to do more comparisons, right? And so you look at either completely free options, you look at other caveat asterisk here is this isn't like Adobe where you can't just like make Photoshop and you can't just make Premiere Pro, or you can't just, right? Like game engines, the game engine ecosystem is interesting because it relies on programmers, and programmers can just make their own engines. And so there's this really, the thing I find so fascinating about this is there's this really delicate balance that Unity is stuck in, where it's like their current business model works because it's a known quantity. And people accept some of the jankiness or some of the fact that like Global Illumination hasn't had an answer for like 3 or 4 years now. It's been deprecated for a really long time, and Unity said they were working on it, and they just haven't because they've been focusing on AI. And do you see what I'm like?
Can I point out that most of the AI tools are useless? to
Oh,
day-to-day
don't. Yeah,
developers. I know.
I could spend a day pointing all this stuff. I talk about it on my channel regularly.
We were just talking about this before we started. I was over in France. I was doing my professional training courses that I was teaching game developers on how to use machine learning in the games industry. And we actually did a demo of using the machine learning toolkit. I used an existing demo that Unity had already done. I had to go and I went away and embellished on it and added more features and kind of walked the users through it. I also fixed it.
Yeah.
Because they broke it. Like if you download, this is actually one of the ones that's available right now. If you open up a new project in the Unity hub and you get it to download one of the sample games, the sample game doesn't compile on the last LTS version of the editor.
Yeah.
So I had to go and fix it and tell them, like, by the way, if you do this yourself, this doesn't work.
I'm not going to spend hours talking about this, but like,
no,
because I really could just do this whole podcast could just be me complaining about weird Unity jank that exists. But here's a good example of like the onboarding experience for a user and stuff that they just like they've had so much time to address and just haven't, right? You can open up a brand new universal render pipeline project, which is so for those that don't know, there's 3 pipelines. There's the Unity built-in renderer, which is the default one that existed in Unity from 5 prior. As of the sort of moving to the constant subscription model, they decided to split up their rendering system and try and bring it up to scratch with what's known as scriptable render pipelines. They have 2 template options that are available for users, and they are templates. And this is a really key thing that I may come back to if I get some time. But like I've got a whole video on this. That Unity led you to believe that these 2 things are sort of forked, and they kind of are, but they're based off of this scriptable render pipeline. Anyway, I digress. There's the high definition render pipeline and the universal render pipeline. Unity now push you to using the universal render pipeline, and they have claimed for a very long time that that's the way you should be doing. That's how you should be making games. That's the thing they're supporting. If you go into there, and I was doing this because I was building a demo recently for a video that I'm working on. I went into the normal game object create menu, chose speed tree, and created a tree. The tree spawned in, and it was pink. And the reason it was pink, if you know anything about Unity, is because the material shader doesn't work. The reason the material shader doesn't work is because it's a built-in shader. So one of their default options for just like a new user is still doesn't have some bifurcation of understanding that there are 3 pipelines. It just like doesn't work, right? So if you're a brand new user and you want to create a tree, you've like done some nice terrain and you like add a tree in, it just like doesn't work. And that has obviously been the case for however long they've had scriptable render pipelines in. And it's just like a really classic example to me of stuff that people have to put up with. And like, if you've used Unity for a while, you're like, whatever, like it doesn't take long. You just make a new, I mean, actually in that case, I don't know if there are, maybe you have to go into the package manager and find a SRP version, but like that should happen for you. And people who use Unity regularly every day should catch that stuff, right? Like if Unity were using the engine and doing things like this, it would be caught, it would be updated. And that's the one thing about like Unreal, and going back to what I was saying about the comparison is for the known quantity that you have for paying for Unity, you just deal with that stuff and like it's fine, right? But once the bars are matched, you start doing those comparisons. You're like, I don't have to deal with this crap in other engines. I put up with it because whatever, it's cheap, right? It's the cheap thing, and I get what I pay for. But once they raise that bar, you start you just can't compete on that level. So that's the interesting place that Unity is stuck in right now, where they've backed themselves into a corner and they're trying to financially get themselves out of it. But it is. I don't like saying it's a subpar product because there's a lot of things Unity does better than other engines, right? It's a comparison you have, but there's just like, as a developer running a business, you have to make those decisions, and you start doing a cost benefit analysis. And sometimes the weight of that starts to shift as you try and make it more expensive, right? Like there's a reason I switched to using Resolve rather than Premiere Pro, right? Like,
we were having this conversation at GDC, weren't we?
Right.
About like moving from one video editing tool to the other. I'm still in Adobe. I'm sorry.
I mean, like it's fine. I get it.
That's the industry has responded to this with tools that will allow you now easily to switch your projects from Unity to Unreal or even Godot. And obviously now people are looking at other options because of this whole debacle.
Yeah, I think it's a real failure of their corporate leadership, because when you look at it, the things that we've been discussing so far have been and because it's really interesting for me to hear this as the perspective of someone who, frankly, I mean, I could just about get some CSS going on a website. So, that's about the extent of my experience here. But to listen
depending
to
on
this
who you're talking to, that makes you a god, by the way.
That might make me a god. And if you think that, please contact me, because I'm always looking for that kind of worship. But seriously, the way that this has been discussed, where you're talking about them going after mad market enticing things like generative AI, which developers aren't really asking for, it's not really working for them, but they're not fixing the fundamental product. Because if they fix the fundamental product, it becomes much easier to have a conversation with people to go, yeah, by the way, we do actually need to make a bit more money off this. Yeah. What do you lot think about paying
that
more
doesn't
for
attract
it?
investors, though. That's
Exactly. Yeah. And this is it, poor corporate leadership as well, because it's that sense of going, I think if I went out, because Tommy, you said that conduit to the world, if I go out to anyone else outside of the industry and go, right, so 30% of the games engine market is tied up in one video games business, and they must go, cool, video games are massive, they must be printing money, they must be so profitable, that business, surely they would be in that kind of position, because to be in such a strong position within a huge market is really interesting. And yes, I understand, in terms of it attracts more independent developers and other things, but it's just fundamentally to have such a strong position and be where they are, it really you really ask questions.
Talking about the leadership, and it comes from that. Was it the co-founder guy, David Hegelson? I think his name is.
Yeah.
He literally came out and went, "Sorry, we literally effed up," and having him say that before even going through comms and saying, "Is this the best thing for me to say at this moment in time?" It shows this disparities of communication.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you need a common line most of the time, and I tell you, when you've dug yourself into that kind of hole, the thing you do actually need to say is sorry. But when you've got essentially your sort of people who are your sort of founding stars of your business, the people who set the vision of the company, disagreeing with the corporate leadership currently at the top, again, not a good look.
Like, I thought I thought this was all very interesting, because naturally it was a nightmare, but it brought all the game developers back to Twitter for a very brief period. And I came back, everyone was very angry, everyone was very vocal. We haven't had a good villain in the industry for a little while, where everyone, because, even you always find some corner of the industry who's like, oh, well, maybe if you can see it from their perspective. Look, no, everybody came together and said, actually, this is a very, very bad idea, and you shouldn't be doing this. And I think the other thing was that, one, everyone likes a villain, but two, I think, speaking to what we've already been discussing, and even, like as we alluded, like Matt and I could have an hour just talking about, here's all the things that has annoyed me about Unity for the last God knows how many years since I started writing games in it. It felt like this was the straw that was breaking the camel's back. As That's you say, like, there's a lot of
100%.
There's a lot of these things that we tolerate, like, don't get me started on the scriptable render pipelines and the lighting. I generally hate everything that they've done since version 5. Anyway, but you've always got all these things where this doesn't quite work the way that it needs to, or this tool that they bought from a third party hasn't been fully integrated into the engine.
Yep.
These features that already work don't really feel like they're getting the proper level of maintenance and work on them to improve them overall as a piece of the product. It's always been an ongoing conversation about the fact that Unity itself doesn't make games, and in turn that actually has an impact on how it builds its product, because it doesn't understand the day-to-day challenges.
Nuance.
Yeah, exactly. And I feel like this was the thing, that we now got a point where the entire games industry stopped and went, do we need to put up with this anymore?
Yeah.
And when you talk about John being the villain of the week, I guess, but isn't he the guy from EA that did a bunch of things there?
He was Project $10 guy.
Yeah.
Remember that? God, that was actually, for our young listeners. That was what, the PS3, Xbox 360 era. Whenever somebody sold an EA game secondhand, you had to pay $10 to get access to the multiplayer.
Oh man, I remember that. Oh
yeah, that was him. Same guy.
John being the villain, he's got a track record for this now.
Oh, this also you could play the multiplayer in Dead Space 2, which everyone was tripping over to check out. Dead Space 2 is a great game, but why play the multiplayer? But yeah, and every developer I was speaking to was then having that moment of reflection. And I know, Matt, you had this. I think you've probably had this more than any of us, because I know, Kwang, a lot of your development isn't in Unity, and I'm not working on anything I'm trying to ship at the moment. I just do a lot of teaching and just making a lot of crappy little demos for my own amusement. We'll get around to maybe making another game at some point. But, you've been doing your own indie dev, you're working in a studio, and you've got a YouTube channel which is actually about Unity tutorials. How has it been for you? I feel like you've just been assaulted on this, not only, and you're a Unity insider, so I feel like you've been assaulted from 4 different angles with this.
Yeah, that's exactly how it felt. Yeah, I felt, we were told. So usually, Unity will, as an insider, Unity will tell us stuff with a good amount of time, and they give us time to have feedback, sometimes 6 months. And our feedback is often which is again NDA stuff. We see things and we give some feedback, and usually it's addressed, and then we get to see the revised version. This financial announcement change was dropped on us, and actually a lot of the Unity employees who ran the insider thing a day or two before it went live, and we saw it, and unanimously, to the same way that it united the game dev community, everybody in that Discord, in the Slack channel, were just this is not going to go down well, because anybody who lives that experience could see the change. So, and I was working at the time when I saw the Slack ping, and I read it, and I immediately turned to Nels, and I was like, Unity are about to announce something tomorrow, and it is going to go really badly. And he was like, oh, it's sure, okay, and just rubbed it off, and I was like, nah, this is a thing. I couldn't say anything, obviously, and then they announced it, and he was like, oh no. And yeah, we didn't get any work done for 2 weeks, because I was back and forth with Unity, and thankfully, I have the freedom to be able to do that, and I appreciate that. I mean, everyone was just in a state of what the heck is happening? What does this mean for us? So, I was in a unique position where I could get some answers, and keep up to date. But I can't even imagine what bigger studios that, it was just it disrupted the industry for nearly a month almost, right?
Even
in a way that lost so much money, right? Just for 2 weeks worth of work.
Yeah,
right?
You just said there, you didn't get anything done for 2 weeks.
Yeah,
2 weeks is a huge amount of time in development.
Yeah, exactly.
That's insane. Just the idea that you're now having questions about
everybody's in crisis mode, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a crisis mode, right? Is this do we have to just start learning Unreal and switch to Unreal now? Do we pivot this whole project because of this? And there's a level of over exaggeration, but I think there's also just anybody who is trying to make a business out of this. You just can't have a business partner make a swift change overnight like that, right? And that was it. It was a sense of, I think it was just a genuine sense of betrayal with what up until that point had been a somewhat known quantity. And I can see, a lot of people are well, it's a business being a business. It's just but there is a level of trust that you have to have in your business partners, in your third party producers or whatever, right? And not everybody can produce absolutely everything themselves. And given the timelines and things, is like I said earlier, though, now it's a mixed bag, right? It's people choose to use an engine because it's easier and cheaper, and it allows you to get your game out the door faster, right? But now there's an aspect of do I now have faith in these companies to not just pull the rug out from underneath me overnight?
If they've moved the goalposts once, what's the odds they're going to do it again?
Yeah, right. And it's and thankfully we're in a unique position as an industry where this tooling isn't dominated, right? It's yes, technically Epic own, and Unity have the biggest market share, but Red Engine existed, CryEngine existed, right? It's not the Adobe situation where there's one dominant only option and it's this far superior option. There are a lot of very, very talented people in this industry who now have a bit more of, who have always wanted to work on their own engine or whatnot, right? And like now have more of a buy-in from their studio heads, right? That are like, oh yeah, now it makes, yeah, we should do this because we now have, and I think that's one of the biggest changes I think we're going to now see is, yes, I think we'll see a lot of studios moving to Godot, and I think that's generally good because for me, it's not and I said this in my YouTube video, is like, if I'm learning anything, I'm learning Unreal because that makes me more hireable as a programmer, as a designer. I do not think it's worth investing my own time into learning Godot right now because it is still a very grassroots. You search for Godot jobs, you're not getting them, right? You search for Epic jobs, you're far more hireable, and that's how my as a jack of all trades freelancer type, right? Like,
but that's it. It's not even just the fact that Unreal Engine is it's a popular engine that has proliferated through the industry. It's also you're typically learning a lot of the same pipelines and processes that are then also adopted and replicated in in-house AAA engines. So it's like, oh, hey, right, you can write in Unreal Engine. Cool. You could probably go and work in whatever engine that's owned by some Sony first-party studio or what have you. So that transferable skill is massive.
Precisely. I mean, it's the C++ thing, right? Like, I hate C++, but knowing it makes you more. It's just, it's an investment in yourself. If your end goal is to work in the games industry and have the broadest skill set to make you more appealing, then I would argue that Epic is, those tools at least are the ones that you want to spend the time in. And it is Unreal and Unity, and I think that's why they've had such a dominance, right? But now that, like I said, there's more options potentially for people to be using.
I think what you said about trust is the biggest thing that Unity have lost. Like, even, obviously they rolled back a bunch of stuff and they put caps and things and stuff like that, but they've lost trust. So regardless of what changes they make, people are like very wary of even touching Unity or carrying on using Unity. It's just trust.
Agreed. And I think what we're going to see, is we're going to see a bunch of games ship. The games that have been and this is the other thing I tried to point out was like, games take like 4 years to make. So you sign up to a thing expecting it to stay a certain way for that amount of time, which, like, to Epic's credit, that's exactly what they have. Is you are on whatever version of Epic you agree to use, of Unreal you agree to use, you're on those terms until you ship your game or upgrade, right? And thankfully Unity have, through a lot of pressure from a lot of people, I think they've decided to make that same decision, but the original announcement didn't say that. So one of the big things is that that's why it felt like such a betrayal, is because it takes a long time to make a video game. And we have a lot of games that I think have been developed since pre-pandemic that are only just now releasing. And I think it's kind of the same thing, that we'll see probably a wave of releases next year, probably now avoiding the 2023 version of Unity. They'll be sticking to whatever version it doesn't get hit by this fee, and then they will probably move ship. Some won't, because whatever, right? Like, there is still that threshold of I need to make $1 million, and there are some studios that, like, we will never hit that threshold, so it will never affect us, and fine, right? Like, by all means. But I do think people who have these goals to be making good revenue, and like, because even if Unity is the choice for you as a business, and this was what we spoke about earlier with the sort of ease of understanding. You understand what 5% of your revenue is when you're working with Epic, right? It's like, okay, just whatever my current income is this year, I just give Epic 5% of that, right? But like with Unity, there's still that weird complexity of like, it's either this or that, and there's still like extra admin on top that just is so unnecessary. And like I said, it's just a very interesting position that the Unity have put themselves in, as far as I'm concerned. And I'm still obviously going to be using it, and I think I really like it. It's one of those things where it's like, I talk about it this way because I love C#. Having to dabbling around in Unreal and dealing with C++ and how just horrible IntelliSense and all this stuff is, especially working in Unreal. Like, C# does a lot of things really nicely, really quickly. Yes. I think it's a great language. I really like it. It's just like the reflection stuff that you have available to you, and just there's so much I could talk passionately about it. And so having an engine that like has all that stuff built into it is really great. And there's a lot of things that Unity does really well. I do think the way, like I said earlier, the script or render pipelines are actually really interesting. And a video I did earlier this year broke down actually like the SRP core stuff and how you can implement your own rendering tools into there. And I just wish Unity had put more work into displaying that stuff, because I think everybody is quite confused about the difference between the two. But my understanding is that you can just create your own rendering tool set if you know how. Just Unity haven't supported that level of like advanced usership. Whereas in Unreal, you have to have the source code. You have to basically rewrite the entire renderer and rebuild the entire engine anytime you want to make changes like that. And that's like a very long amount of time. So there are reasons for loving Unity and things about it. It's just like I care, therefore I'm critical, like.
Yeah, I mean, I think as well, like it's interesting because you're dealing with a lot of people. A lot of the people that are having this very justifiable negative reaction to this are also people who've been in the game for a while. They've all been making games. They've all went from the point of I'm new to game development, picking up Unity, maybe learning to program C#. And I agree, C# is great. I used to program in Java and Objective-C. By comparison to those two things, C# is so good. But like these people have been making these games. Like I got into the first games that I ever finished and actually shipped were all written in C#. And in Unity, I made my games, I shipped my games, and then I've worked on other people's games. Like, so you've been in the space for long enough that then not only are you like, I'm fed up of dealing with this crap, but also I'm confident enough that I can pivot if the business realities allow for that and align for me to do so. The thing that I thought was very interesting was seeing the conversation around new people who are coming into games and going, because usually when they go, I want to learn games, and it's like, probably start with Unity, maybe have a look at things like, Game Maker or, other kind of smaller engines. And then if you can handle Unity and you're all right with it, if you want to go for something bigger and more ambitious, then try Unreal. But the fact that the conversation around whether Unity is your starting engine was happening as a result of this, I thought that's probably it's going to have a bigger impact on them in the long run. Yeah. Speaking from, having used to teach game development, trying to get us in a position where we didn't teach Unity was such a big deal. Like trying to communicate to people senior in the department, like, but we don't want to teach C++ because it's difficult and the students don't like it. I'm like, I couldn't give a monkey's fuck if the students don't like it. We want to give them useful skills. And so we would teach them C++, we would teach them how to use Unreal. Now the conversation is, I spoke with other university lecturers going, do we even stick with Unity? Because students were asking them. They had students attending open days to come and go to their university going, are you guys still going to teach Unity? Because I saw all this thing in the news. Like, that's your legacy. That's the damage to your brand there.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
Like, that's insane.
Yeah. Matt, can I ask, as a C# coder, would something like the CryEngine be a possible switch for you?
Is it a C#? Is it?
Yeah, C#. Yeah.
I mean, I would always entertain. I'm an advocate for learning as many things as possible. So yeah, I'd probably entertain moving into something like that. I don't know the complexities of the engine, so I couldn't speak on that specifically without having some time invested into figuring out like the strengths and weaknesses.
I guess the question is, are your loyalties with Unity itself as an engine, or is it C# as a language? So obviously there are other languages other engines that use C#. I know Godot uses C#, and as I said, CryEngine as well.
Yeah, Godot doesn't support C# natively, but they've recently added support for it. Godot, like I said before, I think for me, it's about like what can I get a job in, and I would say yes. I'd probably knowing CryEngine. There are still studios using that, right? Like so. I think the cool thing about our industry is that like once you kind of learn a language, you can learn any language, and there's caveats with either of them. So you just find the things you enjoy. Like me working, if my studio decide we're going to make our next game in Unreal, we make our next game in Unreal. You just deal with it, right? Or if they say, yeah, we're going to do CryEngine, then sure, I would spend time learning it. So, specifically the tooling, like it's more to what Tommy said, is that I've been using Unity for so long, I understand it. So it's like a well-oiled machine, right? I can very quickly build tools. I have a library of tools and scripts and pipelines for things that I just inherently understand. And that's honestly what my whole channel has been about, is tooling and pipelines and weird intermediary game dev stuff, right? That just doesn't really get covered. I say it's for me 6 months ago, or me in 2 years' time when I'm trying to remember how to do something, right? Like, right. I think that's an accurate description of the sort of stuff that I make.
Yep.
And that really is the stuff that you get lost when you switch, right? And in me playing around with Unreal, there's a few things that Unreal does that just is handled for me, which is great because it's based off of an engine that has been used to make video games. So like it already has multiplayer support just from the get-go, right? And it's stuff like that I care more about of what is the cost benefit of switching engine, and where do I have to invest my time in. Like, I am a tooling person, so I can very, very, very quickly spin up tools in Unity. It's one of the things I think is Unity's biggest strength, is to just like, you can ad hoc that so quickly. With I've tried a little bit of that already in Unreal, and it's much slower. Like, you can do it. It's limited with Unlet as well in certain ways that Unity isn't. And so I'm still learning that phase of like, okay, how do I build tools for Unreal? And that, because as you know, my job most of the time is I'm half design, I'm half architect, but I'm also like interfacing. I'm very much a generalist programmer, right? So I'm interfacing with other members of the team and building tools for them. So that is a lot of what I have my eyes on most of the time when I'm thinking about. I'm just trying to think, obviously, holistically about a lot of the demands that come up.
Because that's it. Like, you know, when people talk about pivoting engines or what have you and going, oh, well, it can't be that hard to move from A to B. And it's like, well, learning how the fundamentals work again as you transition from engine A to engine B, you're like, okay, that's fine. It takes you a little while to recognize, oh, it's like moving from one language, like, you know, spoken language to another. Oh, it's largely similar, but here's this few concessions that are unique. It's when you start getting into the architectural elements of it, like you say, building tools, but also building entire systems that govern a game, where you learn how to do it in one engine, and that's experience that sits with you. I mean, I was even working on a game earlier this year over at a studio where it's like, oh, right, well, here, we'll do it this way because I know this works, and here's the pros and cons of it and whatever else. Moving to another engine then becomes, you know, a bigger headache. And then, I mean, I think funnily enough, we've talked about education, but I actually did want to bring up, like, you know, the work you do on YouTube as well over on Game Dev Guide, because your channel is all about digging into these often less immediately appealing topics for, you know, to stick on a YouTube video, because people are like, hey, here's how you can do this in like 20 minutes or less. And you're like, no, we're digging into like nuances that allow you to achieve certain things. Like, and often it enables for something that's kind of cool, like you did the Hi-Fi Rush video. So how do you render a game like Hi-Fi Rush? How do you do the internals of an apartment like Spider-Man, for example?
Yeah, I need to make a sequel video to that now, because Spider-Man 2's come out and they've changed the way that they're rendering internals. So, like,
I haven't played it yet.
Yeah, they're using ray tracing. They're using ray tracing now to they shoot a ray. Just small tangent. They shoot a ray into the window, and then as soon as it hits the window, they basically transform the rest of the ray trace somewhere off screen and ray trace into a building elsewhere, and then that becomes it's really clever. And so it's just like, well, cool. I guess I have to make a sequel to this now.
Very nice. But yeah, like, so, I mean, not just for yourself, but also I know, like, you know, you're connected to a lot of other Unity content creators, or content creators who are predominantly based in Unity. Like, what's the sentiment been around that community, and like, where are they going with it?
I don't know. I think a lot of it was wait and see. I think a lot of people, some are sticking with it. I mean, there are a lot of content creators that do that full time, right? I don't do that full time. My priorities lie within the game development community and the games industry. That is where I make my money and spend most of my time. So I think there's a little bit of a difference of like choice there, where I'm going where the industry says I should go, because the type of content that I need to make is going to be tied to the things that I'm doing day to day, right? Like, all of my content comes from, I've solved this problem on my own project, or it's something interesting that I've seen other games do and I want to figure out how to do it, because it's going to better my knowledge as a programmer and designer working in the industry. And I like sharing that knowledge, and Unity is very community driven, and I think that's why I felt So I also worked at Unity, and the stuff that I do on my channel is taken a lot from the sort of content I would make when I was working there. And I think that has been like harbored by Unity for such a long time. And I think that's one of the biggest mistakes that they've made, is that they have screwed over their community somewhat. And it's one of the strengths that Unity has as an engine. Like Unreal does not have the same level of support that Unity does from its community, because Unreal is built primarily from AAA teams that all talk within one another internally and don't externalize a lot of this understanding, right? Whereas Unity has been a very grassroots engine, so there's years and years and years of knowledge content available to you. And I think Godot, in the same way that Blender exists, is going to start to build a lot more of that now with a lot of what's changed. And I think, to answer your question specifically, a lot of the developers that I know that are a bit more attuned have been like, hey, I should probably split off my content. I shouldn't be putting all my eggs in one basket anymore. And I feel that way a little bit. I'm probably going to start doing a couple of Unreal Engine things here and there. Like I'm playing around with it in my spare time because I feel that way. But also generally, like I said, I've said multiple times now, it's within my interest to be learning that stuff. So I think that's really the route that a lot of people have gone, is like, oh, we probably can't do this just in case Unity does fall off a cliff. I don't think they will, but I do think that they've diminished a lot of the momentum that they had within the community.
Yeah, I think GDC next year is going to be really interesting.
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to seeing
I'm going to Unite. I'm going to Unite next in like 2 weeks' time.
Yeah,
they've asked me out 15. There, so I'm really curious. I'm really, really curious what the general feeling on the floor is going to be like. And thankfully Unity have asked me to go, and I'm really appreciative of that. So I can't, I can't be a chaos engine, but I will be asking people like, hey, what do you think about chaos? A little bit. I'm always like that. They know that. So I will be just asking people what the general consensus is, right, around their opinions of Unity. I'm just curious to see what people think, in the same way that we've been talking about here. I think a lot of people will be on the same page.
I want to ask George, from his point of view, obviously this is kind of wrapped up with John leaving. How have you felt the messaging for that has been, and how do you think Unity has addressed all the issues? Have they squashed their bad vibes, I guess?
So I think the problem is pretty fundamental, which is trust is long won and very easily thrown away. And I think the issue here is less have they managed to dispel it, but are they on a track where they can go and regain that trust? And I think fundamentally they're going to find it very, very difficult to do so. And I think the biggest reason why they're essentially allowed for, at any point when a company essentially loses its leader to something like this, it has to be weighed up to say the loss of this leader is considered to be big enough that this is showing a sign of us trying to reclaim the trust of that community. So I think they're going to move in that direction in terms of trying to regain that trust. I think the challenges that they're going to have ahead, I think, are as follows. I think, first of all, I don't imagine there's just going to be an enormous sea change. I think, Unity, frankly, is so big that actually they will have the similar impact of any big player within a market, which is that people are not going to immediately move, but people are going to be doing exactly what Matt's been saying, which is saying this project will keep here, the next one will go. And what you will see is a kind of a bleeding out of its core audience. And as we've established, its real problem is that it's not establishing new audiences in the way that it should be doing, while also losing its core audience at a point where it's already not a profitable business. So I think, personally, I think the thing that's probably going to be the most interesting dynamic about this is, will someone buy it? Because if I was looking around in terms of what's going on in the market at the moment, obviously, we've seen what's going on in the wider industry at the moment, not a great time. But again, as a possible asset to the right size business, to have a game engine with that kind of size community where you might be willing to suck up, frankly, like having something that's not making you a huge amount of money, because you see it both as a valuable way of establishing a strategic position within games, but also seeing it, and I think it was interesting talking about the pipeline, about being like, well, this is the pipeline for future talent. And so therefore, if we're locking them into our ecosystem, what we can do is use Unity as a way to get them in. And even if they switch over to Unreal, I'm so I'm imagining a big tech player here, right? Like an Amazon going, okay. And also, yes, those people will all use Unity, and they may or may not stay in Unity, but in the future, they'll also be involved in conversation about what's our cloud solution, right? Are we going to use AWS as well? You know, and it's that kind of thing about going, I wouldn't be surprised if that's a pretty live thought in the back of quite a lot of people's minds of going, because this is what happened with Activision Blizzard, right? You go back to Bobby Kotick and sexual harassment. One of the biggest things there is that it led to a decline in the company's share price to a point that Microsoft, who were looking to make a big, bold acquisition, when actually we can get a very big, high-value business that's going to be enormously important for our strategic future at what is, or what at the time felt like a knockdown price. So I think, I mean, if I was in their position, the biggest thing that I would be doing in terms of the messaging would be actually going back and trying to double down to retain the community, because it's just really basic business principles. You get customers, you retain them, you monetize them. Because if you keep that cycle going and customers are happy, they keep spending money. And if you break it, you break the engine of most good businesses. So I would be spending the time investing in community communications. I think it'll be really interesting to see what they do ahead of Unite. You know, I wouldn't be surprised to see a sort of a South Park style "We're Sorry" video doing the rounds fairly soon. But that would be where I would be saying, like, look, you've got to go and try and do that as effectively as possible. And, you know, the communications around it was about, as in terms of John Riccitiello leaving, it's about as much as the company can do. You know, at any point like that, you can't be like triumphantly getting rid of our leader, see you later, because he's been leading your company for quite a long period of time. It's very much, this is done. You kind of, everyone here can read between the lines. We move on. Let's go and try and rebuild that trust. Because, yeah, I mean, I would say that they're in a tricky position, and they were already in a tricky position, and they've made the position trickier.
Agreed. Yeah. I mean, I've had a lot of people think about that acquisition line, and I agree that probably is where it's going to end up. That makes me sad, because I don't have faith that another company acquiring Unity will have the same values that Unity before IPO had. And I think that's where a lot of people that are in the community, like you said, Tommy, right, have seen Unity change. And I think a lot of people want the version of Unity back that they were used to, that I think was a good status quo. And so I think one of the problems that I think a lot of people have with Unity is that they are now publicly traded, and they're operating like a publicly traded company. And that doesn't necessarily make the same moves that are in the interest of its users, of its like core demographic that built the company in the first place, which fundamentally is game developers, right? And so I think that if that sort of thing does happen, that the majority of the game development community will leave because of everything I've said before, where like they could just make their own engine at that point, right? That will be more in the interest of the type of content that they're making. I can't see a version of this where like Microsoft, I mean, Amazon have Lumberyard, which is basically Crytek. So, and Unity have all of their cloud stuff as well. So that's kind of the other thing, is Unity have tried the tech company thing, and that's got them into this hole in the first place, right? They are a tech company making tech company moves. And I think the core audience are like, what are you doing? Right. So for a lot of us, I think it's more just a case of like, just make a good game engine that like doubles down on the things we love about Unity. And I have this conversation. I'm like, this is the feedback I give internally when I talk to them. I'm like, you should be working on this stuff. Like everything I've brought up in this podcast is exactly the sort of same conversations I've had. And I think there are a lot of people inside Unity that feel the same way. As somebody who's worked there, like I know how it's a big corporation, right? There's a good chunk of people that have joined the company to try. It's like a big thing that moves very slowly, right? Unless you make weird, crazy decisions that cause this rock to fall down the hill. But making change, steering the ship is slow. And I think I just am hopeful that if a company does acquire it, there's somebody who has the interest of the consumer and making I hope it's a company that has made a really successful Unity game. And you know, and they're like, no, we're going to actually like focus on the features. That would be cool. But if a company like Microsoft or Apple, or who, like, if Apple buy Unity, I'm out. Like that's just because like it's not the product. Like they would not turn it into a product that I want to use, because I don't enjoy using Apple products. So no, absolutely. And I think that point about not knowing what they're good at, almost in a sense, and thinking, right, we're going to try and play like a big tech company. It's just like,
orders of magnitude, people. It's like I think it would be Microsoft. I will have to check this stat, but essentially I was looking at Microsoft's revenues globally because I was trying to sort of get a sense on the Activision Blizzard stuff, and it's essentially just the global games industry revenues. You map it and it's basically the same as that Microsoft makes by itself in a year. So if you're talking about Unity going off and Unity, we're going to do a cloud play. We're going to go up against the richest companies in the world. Well, I mean, good luck, lads. I mean, it's not going to go very well for you, unsurprisingly. But I think the only other thing to think about, though, just sort of me going back to my lovely, boring policy round, being a lot of the big tech businesses, the one thing they might find hard is actually buying it outright, because I think going to the competition side of things, again, competition regulators are looking at big tech and going, we're going to try and constrain you in as many different ways as possible and make things hard for you. One, because we're concerned about what your impact is on the market, but two, because it's good for us, because it's good for headlines, it's good for us to go and chase these kinds of things. So you also enter the world where Unity doesn't get bought, but 40% of it does get bought by Tencent, or 40% of it does get bought by Savvy Games. And I think that's, and that would be the other thing as well, is that I think it would be interesting to see whether, I mean, Tencent's not sovereign wealth, Savvy is, but it's about these things where they're more integrated within the sort of the position within they hold within a state, and going like, actually, I mean, I've got to say, unfortunately, I think the Saudis would be very interested, because they're going, right, our ambition is to build a video games cluster in our country, 25,000 jobs by 2030, turning Neom into a futuristic game development city. If you're looking at their things and going, we've basically got unlimited money, but we maybe don't want to try and buy a company outright, because anytime we go after a big American business, there is that sense of, are we biting one of the hands that fed us, in the sense of American military power looking after the Saudis. I mean, yeah, you just suddenly start looking at those kinds of things and going, I mean, I appreciate Unity is actually technically Danish, but hey, here we go. But this is the thing, is like, you start looking at these kinds of things and go, well, we don't want to cause the ructions of buying this thing outright, but we'll buy 40% of it because we can underwrite the losses. That's an interesting thing. So yeah, so that's me just going, Unity, geopolitics. Wow, Pazam.
And then you remember what Tencent has also got significant investment in Unreal Engine as well, don't they?
Well, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, to be fair, like, again, Tencent, what does Tencent not have money invested in? That's always a good game to play. True.
That can be the Christmas quiz this year. Is like,
is it Tencent?
The 10 cents of Christmas. There we go.
Is it Tencent, or what's the other company that like has now just been laying everybody off? NetEase, and then
right.
What's the other company that's unfortunately just been made a bunch of acquisitions?
Embracer.
Embracer, right? Is it Embracer, or is it
right? Okay, if we do a Christmas quiz, I'm going to do a round of, was this an Embracer studio or not?
Exactly. I think it's almost like Animal, Vegetable, Mineral, which is like Embracer, Tencent, independent. That's the game.
Yeah, you can play 20 questions and every answer is an Embracer-owned studio. There you go.
Is it THQ Nordic?
Oh, dear. But yeah, I think on that, I think this is actually a really good point just to start wrapping up the episode, because I also appreciate Matt's still got like a full day of work, or afternoon of work to do. You got to get back in the Unity engine and go make some games, my man.
I have to make a game dev guide video before I go away. Yeah. Like Fridays are my not working for Sonderless day, and I usually just make game dev guide stuff or work on my side project.
We've caught you on your side project day. Well, I do apologize. Yeah. Speaking of, where can the people find you? Where should we go to find you? What social networks are you on? What is your handles?
I'm not really on the. You can find me if you just go to gamedevguide.co.uk. It actually takes you to my YouTube channel. So that's where you should follow me. I do tweet sometimes, but not really, because that is a hellhole now. So best just to follow me there. Join my Discord if you want to chat to me. But yeah, just if you could subscribe if you're interested in the stuff I do. Subscribe to Game Dev Guide.
Like and subscribe, man. Like and subscribe.
Exactly.
We'll get you on. Are you not on Blue Sky yet? That's where all the.
I am on Blue Sky. Yes.
Yeah, I'm on Blue Sky.
My personal account is on Blue Sky. So
feel
free to follow me. Maybe, I don't know.
I'm on Blue Sky, and I don't know who.
I don't know how. Yeah, it's hard to tell on Blue Sky. To be honest.
Yeah, the amount of times I was on Blue Sky like at the weekend or something, and I'm just like, hang on, all these people I know are in here. Like, just started following them again.
I like it because it feels like early Twitter, but it still has a little bit more to go until it's I think if anything is going to replace it, it will be Blue Sky. It seems to be a nice place to be right now, but there's still some stuff missing. Where I'm like, I could just like. Social media has been around now for so long. I'm like, I've stopped using Facebook. I think Instagram's the only one I still use. I never joined TikTok, and I don't regret it. And I think it's okay. I spend time on Reddit and Instagram, and I just like taking pictures of things. So I think that's fine. But I'm trying to reduce rather than gain more.
I cut down over pandemic. I think Blue Sky is the only one I actually post anything that isn't YouTube related or like business related.
But that's the thing about Blue Sky. Blue Sky is like where you hang out with your mates at the moment because invite only. You invite your mates. But if you run any kind of business, your reach is zero.
Yeah,
it reaches your mates. So at the moment, it has no reach.
I mean, on the bright side, it means that all my friends have no excuses for not watching episodes of AI games or episodes of the Branching Factor podcast, for that matter.
There we go.
There we go. But yes, thank you everyone for joining us today. Thanks also to Matt for coming and hanging out with us, because I haven't spoken to you, properly chatted to you since I saw you at GDC.
To be fair, we did hang out a lot at GDC though.
We did hang out, but that was it, because I hadn't seen you in years either. And then it was just like, we're going to hanging out in the Irish bar as well, good. Which we shouldn't be talking about this publicly, because that's like the great secret. That's like the one bar that only the handful of British game developers go to and nobody else.
It was cool.
Next year. Yeah. But yes, and also Kwang and George, you're here with us on a Friday night. Thank you all.
Thank you for like hanging out on a Friday, because I couldn't make weird British times.
It's been the best Friday night I've had in a very long time, and that's both a source of joy and sadness.
All the times are weird British times, I think, at the moment.
That's true.
I think that's safe to say. But we should be trying to figure out how to do try to do an episode in person, because we were just talking about this offline, that George has got an in potentially for us to actually record somewhere in Londinius, which is very, very exciting. What was it? Nodnall. Which is a Red Dwarf reference that I have not heard in about 20 years until a mutual friend of ours texted it to me earlier this week. And I was like, is he old enough to know what Red Dwarf is? And then obviously, because otherwise he wouldn't have said it.
Did he have an eyeball on his chin when he sent you? Did he send you that first?
Oh dear. Right, kids, you're going to have to go and look up Wikipedia to figure out what we're talking about. Thanks once again for listening to us here on the Branching Factor podcast. We'll catch you all very soon on a new episode. Be sure to support us, subscribe us, and all the places and the adverts and all the other stuff that I've put in the message description. Bye. Thank you. The Branching Factor podcast is hosted and produced by me, Tommy Thompson, with support from Anne Sullivan, George Osborne, Mike Cook, and Kwang Yun. Our theme music is provided courtesy of Ben Ridge. The logo and thumbnail art is thanks to Helen O'Dell. Special thanks to Shraddha Gupta and Phoebe Trigg for additional production support. And of course, to all of you out there listening, thanks for joining us for this episode of Branching Factor. Wherever you are in the world, be sure to stay safe, have fun, and we'll be back.